Hello, and welcome to Missouri Law Matters, a podcast all about your Missouri courts. My name is Matt Hamner, and I'm a judge on the Court of Appeals in the Southern District here in the state of Missouri, based in Springfield. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you've been enjoying our podcast, don't forget to like and subscribe, be it on Apple or Spotify. Also, if you want to see video to go along with the audio, don't forget to check us out on YouTube. Subscribe also to the Supreme Court of Missouri's Facebook page and Instagram, as well as our new Missouri Courts Facebook and Instagram. There you can find out more information about the court system. You can also leave us a comment, tell us what we're doing well, give us some ideas for things you'd like us to cover in the future. I want to appreciate everybody that's been hanging out with us on these podcasts over the last many months, and I have to tell you, I'm very excited about our guest today. We've interviewed several Supreme Court justices in the process of doing this podcast, but I've not yet talked to this next gentleman, and I'm very excited. Normally, I don't mention the date that we're doing these podcasts. We try not to tie them to any particular day, but today the date is relevant. It's July 1st, 2025. And why that date is relevant is because this gentleman sitting next to me, it's his first day as the Chief of the Missouri Supreme Court. It is my pleasure to welcome at this time the Chief Judge of the Missouri Supreme Court, Brent Powell. Thank you for joining me today.
Well, thank you, Judge Hamner. I appreciate it. It's a privilege and honor to be here and chat with you.
I can't tell you how grateful I am for you to make time for us today when everything else you've got going on with the job that you've had for a long time and now all the new responsibilities that come with the title. I'm very appreciative of you carving out some time to speak with us today. The first place I always start folks with when we're having these conversations is to give people a chance to get to know a little bit of how you got here, because I think that's the first thing everybody's always kind of curious about. Let's start with your path, how you got into the law.
So I grew up in the Springfield area and born in Springfield. When I was probably in fourth grade, we moved out to kind of the Rogersville area. Attended Springfield Public Schools and at Rogersville Public School, and eventually found my way to Greenwood, which was a school on the campus of Missouri State University. That really was instrumental in my development. I had the pleasure and opportunity to play some sports and played under some really, really great coaches who had a big influence on my life and continued to do so. But primarily my direction and how I got where I'm at today is because of my parents. They introduced me to the law. My father is a practicing lawyer in the Springfield area, and my mother, who's now deceased, we lost her last August, unfortunately, but she was a probation officer, actually, and served in years ago as a probation officer. So I was exposed to the law by them in many ways. I also had an uncle in the Springfield area who I was very close with, who also was a practicing lawyer. And so I think it was always in the back of my mind that I would probably seek out and try to go to law school and become a lawyer. And so that's kind of how I got it wasn't until after law school and I started to feel my way around the practice of law that I kind of figured out what I wanted to do after that.
And I want to talk to you about that, but I want to back up and ask you about something you mentioned. Playing the sports in school. What sports did you play?
It was a small high school, keep in mind, but I
went to one of those too.
I lettered in football, basketball, track, and tennis. So I had the great opportunity to play all those sports.
Yeah, I also played all of those sports. What position did you play in football?
Believe it or not, I was an offensive lineman, pulling guard, and a linebacker.
I was a center and a defensive end.
Oh,
so
okay.
I'm there with you.
Yeah, you are.
Yeah, no, the influence that coaches have in your life, and probably outside of my parents, they were the first people in my life that really had a profound impact on my behavior and how I thought about things and how I went about things. And I know that you've had some incredible coaches over the years that have had that impact on you too.
I have not only at Greenwood, but even as early as junior high and at Rogersville. Coach Newton was a wonderful human being and a great inspiration for me.
And I guess I'll ask you, I think I got the title wrong, and it's Chief Justice, not Chief Judge. I apologize about that.
I think Judge is fine.
We talked a little bit about, you mentioned that you went to school. Did you go to Mizzou, both undergrad and law school?
No, believe it or not, I wanted to also try to play football in college. My grandfather on my father's side and my father and his brother played football in college. And I grew up seeing pictures of them and ended up going to William Jewell College in Liberty and played varsity sports there, football specifically. My freshman year, I broke my leg in a game. And then later that next summer, I lost an eye screwing around with fireworks and bottle rockets. And so that kind of put a damper on some of my playing at Jewell, but I ended up playing until my junior year.
And what position were you playing the same positions in college? Or I assume they maybe shifted you.
Yeah, I was a defensive back, a very slow defensive back. I went from offensive line to defensive back. But you don't make that transition very often.
Yeah, that's not a very smooth transition.
No.
There's a lot more footwork involved.
A lot more.
Yeah,
A lot more.
and
Yeah.
a lot more ground to cover.
Yeah.
And yeah, no, none of those things were really my strengths
Yep.
either as a football player. So no, I understand that. So you graduated from William Jewell,
Yep.
and then where does life take you then?
Then actually I took a year off, worked for Senator Kip Bond. We just lost him recently as well. Here in Jeff City, he had a constituent services offices that I worked at for about a year. And then again, I kind of always knew I was going to go to law school and was encouraged to do so actually by a lot of the staff. Ended up going to law school at Mizzou after taking a year off after college.
When did you graduate?
I graduated in 1996.
Okay. So right around the same time. I was an undergrad at that time.
Yeah.
We were both kind of in the same orbit there in Columbia. So you graduated from law school in 96, and then where does your legal career take you out of law school?
So while I was in law school and right after law school, the economy really was booming. And so the larger law firms were really expanding at that time. And so I had the opportunity to kind of work at a larger law firm. So when I came out of law school, I worked there for about a year. I had hoped to be involved in litigation when I came out of law school, but they asked me to serve in the real estate department. And I learned a whole lot from a lot of really, really, really great lawyers, but that is just not what I was necessarily interested in doing. My wife, who we got married about a year, we met in law school, and she had been working at the Jackson County Prosecutor's office, and we got married in 1997. And so she'd come home in the evenings and tell me about her day. And I'm like, that's a lot more exciting than some of what I'm getting to do. And I was fortunate, a guy named Todd Graves he left a big firm and had just been elected to Platte County Prosecutor's office, and he had a vacancy up there. So I applied and I started working there in probably 1997 or so.
And how many years were you assistant prosecutor there in Platte County?
Approximately 5 years.
Okay.
Todd then eventually gets tapped to be the U.S. attorney for the Western District of Missouri, so the federal prosecutor. And about that time, 9/11 occurred. And so they were hiring more federal prosecutors in response to that event. And so I came on as a new assistant U.S. attorney after about 5 years at Platte County. And I served there for approximately 5 or 6 years.
What was the biggest difference, at least in your perception, between doing the private practice and then transitioning over to doing prosecution?
Well, the big thing for me and what I really enjoyed about the transition was I was a public servant, right? I really, every day wasn't a great day at the prosecutor's office. Every day is never a great day for any lawyer, for that matter. But at the end of the day, when I was coming home, I felt good about what I did. I just really felt like I was giving value to the community and the people that I lived with. That's what I really, really enjoyed about my role there, both at the Platte County Prosecutor's Office as the U.S. Attorney's Office. I also, interestingly, I thought I would be interested in litigation, but I had no idea how exciting that was and trying cases. That's what I really enjoyed about working there. I, of course, was a new prosecutor, a young prosecutor, and they handed me, as they do most new young prosecutors, the traffic docket. And so I, had my DWI cases and my DWI docket, and I just went around and start trying those cases. There was a lawyer named Jeff Eastman from the Kansas City area who did a lot of DWI defense work, and he liked to try cases. And so I didn't even keep track of all the misdemeanor DWI cases that I was involved in trying. But I learned a lot then, right? That was a great experience because I got to learn how to be a better trial lawyer. So that's what I really enjoyed doing when I transitioned from private practice to the prosecutor's office.
And do you think that it was finding that the enjoyment in the courtroom and enjoying that part of the experience? Do you think that's ultimately what led you to think about becoming a judge?
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
definitely. Trying cases is difficult, and
Mm-hmm.
and it wasn't as if I didn't want to continue to do that. It was especially at the U.S. Attorney's Office, which is a great, uh, great job. Getting to court was harder and harder to do. My father, going back to his law practice, he was kind of specialized in workers' comp law, but my uncle that I mentioned earlier, he was just kind of a general practitioner, represented, civil, criminal, domestic, and did some business transactional work too, really. And what I thought I would enjoy was, as much as I had an interest and a focus on criminal law, I really believed I would be interested in expanding the type of law that I got to expose myself to. And so, it was then that I eventually led to apply to be a trial judge, circuit court judge in Jackson County.
And in Jackson County, for those that don't live in Jackson or St. Louis or Springfield, Jackson County appoints their judges. They use the nonpartisan court plan for that. Other areas in our state, they elect their judges. For those of you that live in those jurisdictions, they may be electing your judges. So you go through the process and you're ultimately selected as a trial judge there, a circuit judge in Jackson County. What was that transition like from being on one side of the bench as a prosecutor advocating for the state and then having to switch hats and become a trial judge?
First, the big transition, I think, was moving from Platte to Jackson County.
Right.
Because as you know, every circuit, every county kind of has their own custom and their way of doing things. And I never practiced in Jackson County. So most of the judges that served on that court at the time had before they came to the bench, had practiced in Jackson County. So big transition for me was just learning the Jackson County way and then ultimately asking a lot of questions. So why do we do it that way?
All of our courts operate under the same rules, but they all do it a different way.
That's right. They all have their own local rules and they have their own customs and traditions of how things work. Also, I was assigned to a domestic docket at that time. So the first few months and years was really kind of drinking out of a fire hose, trying to learn a brand new area of the law and working with the lawyers and litigants in that area to try to make sure I not just legally got these issues right, but we're handling those type of cases appropriately. So that was a transition. But I would always tell people, generally speaking, I think a role of the prosecutor and a role of a judge, prosecutor, I always say, is kind of a quasi-judicial role, right? Their responsibility, in fact, their ethical obligation is to do justice, not to win the case or seek to win every argument. Their role is to seek justice. And even if justice doesn't help them win, they can't advocate for something that isn't pursuit of justice. So I think there are some similarities from the type of mentality you have as a prosecutor and type of mentality you have as a judge. And so I thought my personal view is I thought that benefited me in that transition. When I finally got assigned criminal cases, then what was more difficult was not being an advocate,
right,
but sitting and watching and seeing I wouldn't do it that way.
Right. See?
So probably the prosecutors who appeared in front of me were probably the least excited when I got assigned a case.
And I'll tell you, you are not the first judge to tell me that. Yeah. One of the challenges is especially if you've practiced for a long time and then you go up on the bench and you have to watch other attorneys do it and you have to stay out of it.
Right.
It's not your case. It's your job is to call the balls and strikes.
Right. That's exactly right.
That part is always a challenge.
Yep.
To go from having a client, having somebody whose interests you are representing, to having no client.
Yep.
No side that you are protecting or representing.
That's exactly right.
What surprised you the most about becoming a judge?
That's a good question. I don't know if there's something that surprised me. I think maybe coming from Platte County and especially going to Jackson County and being assigned to the downtown courthouses, my eyes really opened about some of the access to justice issues that we have, because of the income barrier. Because, a lot of our people that we serve in our court system can't afford their own lawyer. It's not that they don't want a lawyer. They'd love to have a lawyer. They just can't afford one. And so maneuvering and trying to juggle that new reality that I wasn't quite exposed to before was very difficult, especially coming from the criminal background where, there was always a public defender. There was always someone to kind of step in and represent someone who didn't have the resources to hire their own lawyer, and to see where that didn't exist in the civil arena, but really, especially in the domestic arena, it was very difficult to adjust to.
I was going to ask you about this later, but this is a perfect place to talk about this a little bit. In your legal career as both an attorney and a judge, you have, I'm sure, experienced a lot with pro se litigants, litigants who represent themselves in court.
Yes.
And that process has changed a lot in the last 15 or 20 years.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of tools that have been made available. The Supreme Court, along with local courts, have worked hard to try to give more access. Talk a little bit about the changes that you've seen in that process. Where do you see it going in the future?
Yeah, that's a great question. So interestingly, right after I got appointed to the trial bench to the Jackson County, I was tapped by the Supreme Court, the Missouri Supreme Court, to serve on the Committee on Access to Family Courts. And it was somewhat new, a newly created committee. And one of their main tasks at that time was to help develop forms, for lack of a better term, that pro se litigants could use if they wanted to pursue their own divorce or domestic case without a lawyer. Again, the vast majority of times these litigants didn't want to proceed without a lawyer. They would like to have a lawyer, but if they couldn't afford one, the committee was tasked with trying to put together these forms that could be used by pro se litigants so that they could pursue their own case or have some better tools to pursue their own case. And so I started thinking about it right away. And so this being placed on this committee, and then of course with the docket that I was covering at the time, domestic docket that I was covering at the time, it was something that was really on my mind. And there was a lot of pushback at first, especially from the legal community and from the judicial community, because we were trying to help these pro se litigants. The legal community was concerned is that folks that could potentially afford a lawyer wouldn't go out and hire a lawyer because they would try to save some money and do it themselves. The judicial community was somewhat concerned because they didn't want to try to get in a situation where we're showing them and telling litigants how to try their case. As you said, right? We're supposed to be neutral and just call balls and strikes. And we can do that with these type of aids that we give litigants, but there is an appearance that we may be kind of putting our finger on the scale a little bit by helping these litigants in the preparation of their case by providing them with these forms. Now, those concerns have really washed away. Now, the issue seems to be is that we're not doing enough, right? The court's not doing enough to help pro se litigants, and we should have more forms, and we should have better ways to give pro se litigants true access to our courts. And it is just a sea change, maybe too strong a word, but there has been a change in mindset in this arena.
I think there's been more acceptance of the fact that, no matter what we try to do, it's not changing. We are going to have pro se litigants for forever. We will always have people who want to come to court and represent themselves. I think that a lot of judges, trial judges particularly, have embraced the fact that let's see if we can make this process smoother.
That's right. And make sure that it's fair for everyone. So yes, I completely agree with you. And I think the future, you're involved in this, Judge Hamner, is the future is probably, it will be interesting to see how AI assists not just the courts, but pro se litigants with their abilities to kind of represent themselves. But as AI has developed, and as we've all heard, we got to be very cautious about how we use that. And it will be a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful tool, but it needs to be a tool, not necessarily an answer or solution to the problem.
It's a means of getting to a solution.
That's right.
Yeah. And as long as people utilize it that way, we will be okay.
Yes.
But
that's right.
AI is a completely different, we could do another 45 minutes just talking about AI and how it can affect the legal profession.
Yep.
So I appreciate you taking the indulgence with me to talk about pro se litigants there.
The other thing I would note that's somewhat related to this is the culture and the idea and the concept of the role of the courts. That has really changed. It's somewhat related to your question with respect to pro se litigants.
Right.
But when I came on as a trial judge in 2008, this idea of treatment courts was somewhat new. And in fact, there were those who thought that courts should just be calling balls and strikes and shouldn't be trying to help and assist a societal problem. Relatedly, there was this concept of case management, that courts had a duty and responsibilities to manage their caseload to make sure the litigation continued and didn't stagnate, and we didn't have situations where cases were on file for 4 and 5 and 6 years, to make sure the lawyers and the litigants were engaged in moving the case forward. And that was very foreign to a lot of judges. And the concept of doing case management and working with the lawyers and the litigants to set timelines and set deadlines and do those type of things really changed a lot from when I first was appointed to now where we are today, where I think that is absolutely the expectation that we have for our courts. The treatment courts have done wonderful things, and people have seen the benefits of that. And so the concept of the treatment courts has gone just from substance abuse to mental health and to veterans and all the other areas where the courts have always interacted with the litigants and the people that we serve, but we never tried to get involved in trying to help them and improve their lives. And when I first came on as a judge, my role was to call balls and strikes, not try to help people that were having these issues. And we've done kind of a 180 in that area.
Yeah, and I think it's that it's not that courts weren't doing anything. We would have people on probation and they would be offered services, but it wasn't forward facing.
Right.
It wasn't forward facing like treatment courts are.
Right.
It's the courts taking this more active role in trying to effectuate change in people's lives. And you're right. There was a lot of resistance internally to that in the court system, but also from the public who questioned whether or not that is a role that our courts should be taking. And I think over the years, with the dedication of the professionals that have worked in our treatment courts, with the success that they have had, with the stories of the people whose lives have been changed by those programs and how well they have done, I think it's convinced people that, yes, this is a role our courts should be playing.
And
it's one we do well.
It's an expectation, not just even that's great that they're doing that. And I'm glad you mentioned probation, because while I never served as a treatment court judge or commissioner, I did serve on my probation docket. And that was always the goal. Let's try to find a way to get people to succeed. And this goes back to who I am as a person. So my mother, when she was hired as a probation officer way back when, she'd gotten her master's in guidance and counseling and served as a social worker for some time. And when she was hired at probation and parole, all of the people, all the probation officers that she served with were basically former law enforcement officers. And the mentality at the time was that, well, we just got to keep an eye on these probationers and just make sure they don't get in trouble. And if they do mess up, we're going to, get them back and punish them in a way. And I think even way back then, the Department of Corrections here in Missouri was starting to see we need to be much more proactive in improving these folks' lives and not necessarily looking to revoke them and punish them for their past behaviors. And so my mom was one of the first folks that got hired as a probation officer to kind of fit that mold. But it takes time for that culture and those concepts that existed when I first became a judge and when my mom first became a probation officer to shift to this concept of, well, what we're really seeking to do is improve public safety by reducing recidivism and finding ways to improve individuals' lives who are usually almost always suffering from either substance abuse or a mental a mental or behavioral health issue that can be addressed in the community potentially without the necessity of a jail or prison.
Absolutely. It's wonderful to see programs like that take root. And certainly it's possible in another 20 years, the culture and the attitudes towards those types of things will change, and it may shift in one way or the other. But I'm really happy that our court system has shown the ability to be flexible, see an area that we think that we can improve and not be afraid to proceed down that path.
Yep.
You know,
I completely agree, but the term you use is very appropriate. Flexible. It's very easy for us to get kind of stuck in our ways, and we've done it this way forever, and why should we change? But we always need to be looking at ways that we can improve. That doesn't mean change for change's sake, right? But if we can do something better, we should give it a shot.
Now, at some point, you've been a trial judge for a while. You get the opportunity to potentially become a judge on the Missouri Supreme Court. I, of course, know how this process works, being a judge, being an appellate judge in the state. But tell the folks who are listening and watching us, how does one become a judge on the Missouri Supreme Court?
Well, within any judicial vacancy that falls under the nonpartisan court plan or the Missouri plan, when there's a vacancy on the court, a commission that exists both at the appellate level and at the trial court level in those counties and circuits where the nonpartisan court plan is the process for appointing judges. The commission, which is made up of lawyers, lay people, and a judge, meet to interview the applicants for that vacancy. So when there is a vacancy, a notice goes out and the commission sets up deadlines and a process to file an application and to set up a time to have interviews with the commission members, and the commission members then interview the applicants, review their application, interview the applicants, and then from the individuals who apply for the vacancy, they pick 3 individuals from the group of people, and those 3 individuals' names are sent to the governor, and then the governor has 60 days to appoint from that panel. After you've been appointed as a judge in that process, then you go up before the voters and either be retained or you'll not be retained and removed from office. That election usually has to happen in approximately 1 year after your appointment. And then the judge comes up for retention periodically, depending on the level of judge they are, as far as a trial judge or an appellate judge. So there was a vacancy on the Missouri Supreme Court, and I applied. The appellate commission is made up of 3 lawyers who are picked from across the state, one from the Southern District Court of Appeals region, one from the Eastern District Court of Appeals region, and one from the Western District Court of Appeals region. There are then 3 lay people that are also appointed by the governor from those different areas. And then the Chief Justice of this court, the Missouri Supreme Court, serves as chair of that commission. And so I applied to the commission that was in place at the time and was fortunate enough to be named to a panel, and my name was sent to Governor Greitens, who then, again, great honor and privilege, I was appointed to be a member of this court approximately about 8 years ago.
Through my next question,
Yeah.
It says you've been on the court now for about 8 years.
That's correct.
So talk to me about the transition from the trial bench to the appellate bench. What have you liked about it? What have you not liked about it? What have you found with that?
Well, I miss the courtroom. All right. That goes back to, my days in Platte County. I miss being in the courtroom. And I tell people this all the time. I miss my probation document, right? I miss interacting with litigants and people, and my probation document where I did that a lot.
Right.
So that was a big transition. But I should take a step back and say one of the things that led me to apply to the Supreme Court. I'm a trial lawyer, right? I'm a trial judge. I didn't actually clerk at, the Missouri Supreme Court. So it wasn't so much that I had the desire to be an appellate court judge. What I gleaned and what I learned as a trial judge was that the court, in addition to all those important cases that we hear as a court, the court has administrative responsibilities over the entire court system. We have a unified court system, which means all of the courts kind of fall under our umbrella. And so we as a court kind of dictate what their rules, what their policies are, what they should be doing in their courts. And the court doesn't do that in a vacuum. They rely on other judges and lawyers across the state to provide them recommendations and advice in this area. And I served on a number of those committees. As I mentioned, the Committee on Access to Family Courts. I served on some criminal committees, and we would periodically make recommendations to the court. And frequently the court would adopt most, if not all, of the recommendations that we would make. But sometimes they didn't, and sometimes they went a different direction. And I thought I was very interested in that part of being a judge. As much as I loved hearing cases and interacting with litigants, I really enjoyed my work in trying to improve the administration of justice through the state through my work on these various committees. And so I knew that as a member of this court, I would have the opportunity to spend a lot more time, devote more resources and effort to that area. And more importantly, I could have a vote and a say at the table when that happened. And that was what really, really interested me and sparked my desire to apply for the vacancy that came open.
And I think that's something that a lot of people don't understand about the Missouri Supreme Court and the role that it has, is that while, the cases that you hear and the decisions that get made, they get all the headlines, but the majority of the good work that you all do is related to the administration of not only the court system in our state, but of our bar and the attorneys that practice in the state of Missouri, and how basically everything dealing with the judiciary operates in this state all flows from the top down and flows from this court down.
That's right. That's right.
And that is an incredible responsibility, number one, to be making those calls and to do all that. And I'm grateful to the Supreme Court for not only taking the time to do all that, but for the way that you all do that in soliciting advice from getting committees and groups together of trial judges who are on the front lines and other people, stakeholders who are invested in the process, and taking all of that input. At the end of the day, it has to be done a way. Somebody has to decide a way to do it. And not everybody is necessarily going to be on board. But if everybody's had input in the process, and if everybody's had their opportunity to have their say, I think they feel a lot better about the end result wherever it gets to. And I've always been very appreciative of the Supreme Court for taking that time.
Well, that's very kind. And I concur. I agree wholeheartedly with your sentiments there. But I also should note that you, Judge Hamner, have served in that capacity many times and working on committees and other various groups to make recommendations to us. And so it takes a commitment, not just from the members of this court, but a commitment from the lawyers and the judges who give up their time, right? This is extra duty, right? This is overtime duty. And they give up their time and energies to serve in these committees and groups and task force and work groups, and provide us with this valuable input to help us try to improve the way we administer justice in the state.
That's excellent. And now here you are, having now been on the court for 8 years, and on this very day that we are talking, you have ascended to the role of Chief Justice of the Missouri Supreme Court. Tell people a little bit about, I have some understanding of what that means, but tell people a little bit about what the role of the Chief Justice is and how it is that the Chief Justice gets selected.
For one, the Chief Justice serves as a chair, so to speak, of the court and is the voice of the court. But really, it's the voice of the 7 members of the court. So, and we're a very collaborative court. So we work very closely with one another. So a lot of what I will do and a lot of what the previous Chief Justices have done who've served in this role have sought collaboration and input from their colleagues on various issues that come, not just cases that come before the court, but issues that come before the court. And so one of my more important roles is to kind of lead that effort, right? And lead that discussion and lead that collaboration. There's also just really small administrative duties, right? As you know, Judge Hamner, and as a former trial judge yourself, at any given day, a number of just motions to continue, motions to let an attorney appear pro hoc vice, meaning from another state if they're sponsored by a local lawyer here. There's just a lot of what I would call not major legal issues that need to get decided, but issues that still need to be decided to keep, as we talked about earlier, keeping the case moving. So this court has always kind of advocated those responsibilities to the chief. So while each member of this court has the absolute right to weigh in on every continuance request, they prefer not to. And so they leave that to the Chief Justice to utilize his or her discretion as they see fit to kind of grant those requests. Then, of course, there's a lot of this, meeting with lawyers and a lot of public appearances. I had the privilege and honor as one of my first official acts as the Chief Justice is to swear in a new director for the Missouri Public Defender System. And so those are the type of kind of ceremonial roles that the Chief Justice serves, in addition to giving a annual state of the judiciary remarks to the legislature every year and also addressing the Missouri Bar at its annual meeting. So those are kind of big overview issues. But what you never know, what the Chief Justice never knows, is what could happen during their 2-year tenure. And so you just kind of always hold your breath that there's not another pandemic or other major issues that arise during your 2-year stint.
I will continue to keep my fingers crossed that we don't have any
too.
disasters, and assuming that we don't have anything else that comes up, what do you want to see the next 2 years look like? What are you envisioning your message and your role being as Chief Justice of the Supreme Court in the next couple of years?
Well, as I kind of mentioned already, access to justice is an important issue for me and has been since I came to the court. And so I think in that, access to justice is a big tent. There's a lot. There's a lot. We could talk about interpreter services. We could talk about ADA issues. So, and all of those are important. But the three that kind of come to my mind is I do think my wife grew up in a very small rural community in North Missouri. And in the county where she grew up, there's not one practicing lawyer there. In fact, the associate circuit judge there, and the prosecutors, I don't believe is from her county. So we have legal deserts across Missouri, and I hope to work with the bar in trying to find some solutions and some things that we could do to try to correct that legal access issue. People from outstate and small counties like that shouldn't have to drive to some big city or another bigger community to find a lawyer if they have the resources to do so. I think related to that is the cost of litigation, right? This is a monumental problem, but it is one of the reasons people can't afford lawyers is the cost of litigation has risen so much that we as a judicial system have priced lawyers out of providing legal services to the everyday person, right? It's becoming way, way, way too expensive. And I think there's ways that we could look at trying to, incentivize lawyers to provide services for pro se litigants, but also find ways to make the litigation less expensive so that lawyers don't have to charge as much. And then finally, I think it's very, very important for us when we talk about access to justice that we're very cognizant that every person, whatever their walk of life is, their race, their ethnicity, their religious background, everyone should have access to our courts, and we should be very cognizant of how those issues sometimes have played a role in kind of preventing individuals to get access to our court system. And so those are kind of the three main areas that I would like to work on during my 2-year stint in the realm of access to justice. My background, as we've talked about, is in criminal law and criminal justice. And I have a specific interest in improving and working on the administration of our criminal justice system. Since I came to the court, in fact, one of the reasons I was very interested in applying for the vacancies on the court at the time was I believed that the administration of justice could improve in our state through the better utilized pretrial processes and procedures. And since I've come to the court, I tried to help the court and other groups improve the rules with respect to pretrial release And also then, as I continue to implement these rules, find better procedures and policies for doing so. I'd like to see that we have a pretrial administrator assigned to every circuit across the state, in addition to maybe other resources to help find folks that aren't a danger to the community. They are committing crimes, but they're committing non-dangerous and property-related crimes, and their issues that cause this are based largely on substance abuse and mental health and behavioral health issues. And if there's ways that we could find through our pretrial procedures and practices to screen and find those individuals and then find resources for them in the community, I think we could do a lot to improve public safety and decrease recidivism throughout the state. So that's one of the areas that I'm obviously going to be very interested in moving forward. I think also one of the things that has developed in the state with respect to a crisis that is occurring is the backlog for mental health competency exams and restoration. And that is something that really has become a crisis in this state. I'm hopeful to put together a group to look into ways to come up with solutions that can work to decrease a lot of the issues and the backlog that we have in the competency exams and then in restoration. And then lastly, we've talked a lot about the Missouri plan or the non-partisan court plan, but I hope to continue to work to ensure and strengthen the plan's use through our state.
Those are all incredibly laudable goals. Certainly, you may not have enough time in 2 years to address all of that.
Probably won't.
But I love that you're passionate about those things. And certainly, as a former trial judge, as somebody that's on the appellate bench now, all of the issues that you identified are certainly issues that your average trial judge who's sitting in a courtroom in Missouri in some county right now are dealing with. All of those issues, making sure they have access to people who maybe don't speak English, or people who have difficulty getting to the courthouse, or that maybe they don't see so well, and maybe they don't hear so well, that maybe can't afford a lawyer, but still need to get something done. All of those things are happening in courtrooms right now.
Yes.
And finding solutions for those things are very important. Pretrial services has been a topic that we have been discussing as a judiciary for a long time. It's something that I'm hopeful as day is coming. I think there's a lot of enthusiasm for pretrial services. I think there's a number of people that wish we had pretrial services and had the ability. I know that the courts have worked through. We've had a pilot program, I know, where we have piloted some plans for some pretrial service situations and some programs that would potentially work. And I'm very hopeful that you can help get some traction with respect to that, because I agree with you. I think that would be an incredible benefit, certainly to criminal defendants who are presumed to be innocent, who have a right to be released before their trial, provided they're not a danger, provided that they meet the qualifications and criteria that we use. But it's also a benefit of the community to know that we aren't holding people that we shouldn't be holding on to.
Right. And there's cost savings to there too. In many ways, improving pretrial practices and procedures across the state will take some resources. But what we think the data will show is that the amount of money that local communities, that counties are paying to house people pretrial while keeping their communities safer, and again, with the hope of improving recidivism. And because if we can decrease the financial resources of housing someone pretrial, that would then decrease the reimbursement the state's required to pay to those jails if and when a conviction comes about. So while I do think that is a great challenge of trying to create and implement some changes and improvements and expansion of our pretrial policies and procedures, I think there can be some savings and some resources that we will benefit from if we implement these good practices.
It can always be difficult to convince people that you have to spend money to save money.
Yep.
That's always a challenge. But this is one of those instances where I truly do think that is true. But hopefully we will continue to progress down that path and we'll see those things. Anything else that you want to tell the public about what you see in the next 2 years, or about anything you're excited about, or about your role as chief coming up these next 2 years?
Nothing specific, but I will say I'm very excited to serve in this role. It is a true honor and privilege to serve, and it is with great honor that I work with great judges across the state, but also great staff and people that work in our court systems every day. It is a true honor and privilege to technically be leading them during this time. But like any good leader will tell you, that the leader is only as strong as his team or her team. And we have a great team behind us. And I look forward to working with the judicial team across the state in not only administering justice in our court system, but improving the way we administer justice in our court system.
Excellent. Before I let you go, I'm going to ask you a selfless question. This is a question that I actually want a little advice on. So, as I've mentioned before on the podcast, I don't know that I've said it today, I'm married to a prosecuting attorney.
Yeah.
She has a very stressful job. She has to make a lot of hard decisions. And I, in my role as a judge, have often been faced with a lot of difficult decisions. I'm known to have some pretty stressful days. And a lot of times we got to come home and be in the same house together and figure out a way to get through all of that. I know you, in your role as a judge on the Missouri Supreme Court, have some difficult days. Your wife, who is an incredible person, she's also a federal judge, and she has similar stresses and similar problems.
She's the chief of the Western District Court.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So
she it's a 7-year term.
Wow.
That causes her day-to-day life as a federal judge, serving in that role, a bit of stress.
No question.
Yeah.
So with all of that you have to do on a daily basis and she has to do on a daily basis, how do you guys manage to, when you come home at night, to figure out a way to put all that aside and live a normal life outside of these incredible responsibilities that are placed on you?
Well, I frequently tell people who ask that question that the supremacy clause is alive and well in our household. I do what my wife asks me to do or tells me to do. And if I do that, we get along fabulously. It is. Like all lawyers, though, have kind of stressful lives. And so I think it's very helpful to have someone there in your household who has, walked that road before and
Right.
can appreciate and understand some of the stresses and difficulties that I'm going through. I'm a lucky person for a lot of reasons, but especially to be married to my wife. But she's very very thoughtful in the, I won't even say advice, but how she responds to questions and concerns that I raise from my work as a judge. I find it to be works very well for us, I believe. But we try to have a normal life, right? We have family, and I was telling you before we started the podcast, we have a little lake house and I get away. My wife loves to cook. I like to grill. If you saw me at our lake house, you wouldn't recognize me because I'm usually in a tattered shorts and t-shirt and standing in front of the grill somewhere, hopefully smoking some brisket or making some pulled pork. So that's how we like to try to enjoy ourselves and live something of a normal life.
Well, it is always great, especially when I talk to judges and lawyers, that this job is really hard, and we don't make any bones about how hard it is. It provides us incredible opportunities, but it's also at times really, and to have somebody that supports you, that can kind of have your back and is there to listen when you need to unload things and when you need to unburden yourself with stuff. It's always good to have somebody that's supportive like that.
Yes.
And I know, and I'm glad to hear that I'm not the only one that burdens their partner with the things, but they take it well. And they're very helpful and kind. And so I appreciate your indulgence. That question was very interesting to me, and I needed some advice. So I'm glad. Last question I have for you before I let you get about your day and do your thing. And this is the same question I ask everybody. So it's just my little thing. What's the best thing that you have seen lately? It could be a movie or a TV show or a sunset or just a dog running through the park, whatever you think. What have you seen lately that you really like?
Well, I don't watch a lot of TV, to be honest with you. But somehow I had Netflix on and watched the show The Residents. If you're familiar with that, it's kind of a whodunit, and I would recommend if that's something you're interested in. And that's a rarity. Again, I don't watch much TV other than college football. I'm a huge college football fan, and so if in the fall the TV will always be on with a game somewhere. And if I'm not at a Mizzou game myself.
Well, I cannot wait for the football season to start.
Yeah.
And I'm very appreciative of the time you've taken today, Chief. Thank you so much for being with us today and making some time for us. Good luck the next couple of years as Chief Justice. And thank you again for all you do for our court.
Well, thank you, Judge Hamner, for hosting and having me here today. I really appreciate your time and energy and promoting the courts. I appreciate your efforts in this area.
You did an outstanding job, as you always do. Thank you all so much for listening to us today. Again, don't forget to like and subscribe to the podcast on all your various podcast areas of choice. Also, don't forget to check us out on YouTube and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Your Missouri Courts, as well as the Supreme Court of Missouri's Facebook and Instagram page. With nothing else to cover at this time, this podcast is adjourned. Thank you, folks.